So after I completed Mega Man X4, both in English dub and English dub, I figured that I would take the time and see the differences between the game and the manga, because apparently the manga has some story elements that alternate from the main game. So I'll be taking a look at some of the differences in the manga in comparison to the game. So, starting off with Web Spider here, and his motives seem to be on par with what happens in the game, like he protects a weapon in the jungle. Except this time, the weapon that he was using or guarding, he was going to use that to burn down cities and just kill a whole bunch of people who live there. And to top it all off, he also killed a whole bunch of Maverick Hunters who went to investigate the weapon. So, I'm guessing X follows suit and he might have saw the aftermath. So when he goes to find this investigation team, Web Spider actually reanimated them using spider webs. So you know that part of Demon Slayer where everyone goes into that forest filled with spiders and they're all being controlled with spider webs? That's kind of what I'm getting from this. So this weapon the Web Spider was protecting and planning to use to destroy in the city, he calls it the Anger of the Soldiers, because he was planning to use the weapon to avenge the anger and pain of the Reploid's soldiers because they were labeled as Mavericks. And this really angered X greatly to the point where he just shoots him with a charge shot. And as he's being destroyed, Web Spider actually says something that's kinda haunting. And then it says here, and I quote, "They're not going to end. The conflict you speak of will never go away. As long as humans are imperfect, it stands to reason that we, created by humans, are also imperfect. As long as humans continue to deny this natural outcome as irregular or maverick, and as long as we live in a world where pseudo-heroes like you are born, we will continue to cry out for the independence of Reploids. Our relationship with humans was predetermined from the moment our first unit was invented. We Reploids are mechanical puppets that wander through endless hell while in this world." So at that point, Web Spider is disclosing the fact that they're just instrument of what the humans built them to be. They were doomed from the start because they were built to be this military unit that would carry out any and all war that would happen on the world. And that's Web Spider's perspective on possibly the entire Reploid race. They're just weapons through and through, built to be puppets that submit to whatever the humans order. Kind of reminds me what Sigma had said in the beginning of X's story.
It's about the Maverick Hunters, General. They are far too eager to please the humans and continue to hunt down the Reploids. Do you believe they pose a significant threat?
Perhaps.
You already know the truth, General. Their sole mission has been to destroy any Reploids who fail to do as the humans order. It's in your best interest to stop them now, before they turn on you. You possess enough power to destroy them!
And I think that really gets on the Web Spider because seeing the conflict and being labeled as Mavericks, it really does get to him. Just how maniacal or even manipulative that humans can be. So Web Spider's campaign here might as well be in an act of revenge. He even goes so far to call the weapon that he was guarding the anger of the soldiers. So chances are that he would have been out for blood, but he would have his own reasons doing so. So for Cyber Peacock, it's pretty much the same thing. He goes into cyberspace to corrupt the network, except here is a bit more drastic because now Iris is getting involved because she's been using the network to basically nurse Reploids back to hell during the conflict. So Zero goes after Cyber Peacock here, and I like to think of it as the similar plot scenario in Mega Man Extreme when X goes inside of the mother computer. So it's kind of like if Zero was a program and he's going inside of cyberspace to confront Cyber Peacock. And while Zero's in there, Cyber Peacock actually uses his powers to make Zero have flashbacks of his past memories. So Cyber Peacock is using manipulation to get the better hand here. But Zero retaliates, and as he retaliates, Cyber Peacock instead tries to trap Zero inside of cyberspace. And the way that he does that is that he detonates a suicide bomb. So Cyber Peacock just flat out detonates himself so that Zero is trapped, but Zero manages to escape. But because of that suicidal bombing, This greatly affects Iris as she was seeing the whole thing, and somehow she gets infected with the bug that Cyber Peacock had, and because of that, she is comatose. So this to me is kind of a tad darker because even though Cyber Peacock is one of Sigma's Mavericks who was on a mission to basically test X's limitless potential, here it feels like that he's just trying to trap Zero inside the cyberspace by any means necessary, even if it means self-destructing. But what I find interesting out of all this is how this ties into Iris, because from my perspective, it feels like that Iris is neutral in the conflict. She doesn't want to see anybody get hurt, so it's fitting for her to be a nurse, especially when she was a navigator during the events of Mega Man Extreme 2. So I think that she'll be involved in these conflicts, even though I think that's not her intention. She's neutral, she's basically a nurse during this whole thing, and she's getting into so much trouble because of it. So before the Great Ripple Force War happens, Storm Owl is actually leading an attack on an island near a volcano. I want to believe it's the same volcano that Mega Dragoon hit himself in, but so far it just seems to be just a regular attack, and Zero's part of it. And then that leads up to what happens on Sky Lagoon. And after that incident, Storm Owl is actually with General and Colonel, and they're trying to figure out what to do after the fact. And Storm Owl is actually the one who, for lack of a better term, pitched the idea of rebelling for independence so they can preserve their honor and pride. So it was actually Storm Owl who came up with the idea first, according to what's happening. And then, surprisingly enough, Storm Owl is also the one who commanded the fleet to soar over the city and broadcast the event that happened at the Memorial Hall, where the general is announcing the independence. So that part where you see the blimp fly by and that it's broadcasting a speech, that was actually his handiwork. And when the coup began, he launched his air brigade over that same volcano, or I think it's a different one, so that the fleet could conquer the air, like it said in Storm Owl's intro when you select them in the game. But Storm Owl so far seems to get it the worst because X shoots him down with the ultimate armor on, and this is right after all of Storm Owl's subordinates were destroyed, and all Storm Owl could do is watch in awe as X furiously strikes him down with a charge shot with the ultimate armor. And as he does, X tells Storm Owl that it was actually him that was the Maverick the entire time, and that humans made no mistakes. Because since Rebel Force didn't want to surrender, drop their weapons, and resort to diplomacy, they would rather be independent in the name of honor and pride, not really sharing their side of the story of what actually happened on Sky Lagoon, even though the colonel in the game said that Rebel Force had nothing to do with the attack. So instead of just clearing their name, they would rather preserve it, despite the fact that they were being accused of the attack. So I think on Storm Owl's side of the story here, it really goes to show how honorable Rebel Force really is. Even if they were labeled as Mavericks, they're still going to hold on to their beliefs, for better and for worse. Mega Dragoon is a special case because right after X gets the ultimate armor and he destroys Storm Owl, Mega Dragoon practically wastes no time challenging X to a fight, and he defies his fist as the laws of the heavens and the laws of the earth, which I'm assuming is his way of describing his philosophy of why he gets into fights, saying that his fists are for his own greed and that his goal is to kill X in battle. And Mega Dragoon, being the street fighter that he is, honestly puts up a decent fight against X, even so much as catching X midair during the Nova Strike. And because of that, Dragoon comes to the assumption that he managed to kill X, and he thinks that Heaven didn't give him a strong opponent to fight. In fact, it was his boredom that led to him becoming a Maverick, because Mega Dragoon really likes fighting. Like, he lives for it. And he believes that because he became a Maverick, that's his punishment for not getting into fights. Like, he doesn't have the thrill of fighting anymore. And X, who managed to regain consciousness after getting knocked into a crater, manages to get one good shot in, and Mega Dragoon thinks that X is a gift from heaven, essentially, because not only did he meet the person that gave him a thrilling time, a good fight, also manages to defeat him. So even though in the game he blatantly says that he always wanted to fight X and Zero, here he lives for it, saying that his fists are for his own greed, that he lives for fighting, that having a thrilly fight is some sort of gift from heaven, even so much as calling his fists laws of heaven, laws of earth. This guy really lived just for, I don't think he's even the sport of it. Amber Dragoon just really loves fighting people, even if it means to the death. This might be the most darkest part of the manga thus far. Jet Stingray is so loyal to Colonel and the General that if you basically told him to jump or swim, he'll say how high or how far. So just like in the game, he decimated a city and he fled from the scene. Here we're given greater details about that city because the city was located near a high-scale refinery where lots of energy was being produced. And his task was to cut off that energy supply, which would impede the hunter's efforts to chase him. So taking into consideration of what that would do, i.e. would cut off so much life support and basically economically ruin them, he goes and pulls the trigger anyway and just cuts off the energy source. A grand total of 800 and 1,000 families were living in that city, but the Repliforce subordinates managed to evacuate all the human civilians so that way there wouldn't be any casualties. So at the very least, Repliforce is declaring independence, but they wouldn't sacrifice human lives because of it, because, well, Sky Lagoon already saw that. So as Jet Stingray is carrying out the Colonel's plan, Zero arrives on the Land Chaser, and Jet Stingray is actually furious that Zero is against the Colonel, and then he proceeds to fight Zero. And this is just me assuming, but at one point of the manga, Zero actually defects from the Maverick Hunters, which I believe that it was him trying to gather intel from within the Repliforce coup d'etat. So at one point, the Repliforce self-defense force actually attacks Zero, but that was just because Zero was trying to gather intel from within enemy lines. So he's following the classic to deceive your enemies, you deceive your friends shtick. Hence why Mama Dragoon didn't fight him. So Jet Stingray's forces are wiped out, and Zero is actually rescued by Iris as she was providing medical treatment. But for Zero, it didn't really matter if Jet Stingray and his forces were destroyed or not, because the entire city was destroyed. All those resources gone, possibly homes gone. So even though the humans are safe, at what cost? And that's something that Zero lamented the most. This next one is kind of short, but it's still pretty impactful in what happens here. When X approaches Split Mushroom, Split Mushroom is actually malfunctioning, and X tries to incapacitate him rather than just flat out destroying him. So when he actually does that, Double appears, and he just goes straight for the kill. He snatches Split Mushroom and just flat out slashes him into multiple pieces, and he does that right in front of X. So I think that Double exposing his true form is apparent here, and it's actually kind of early compared to what happens in the game, because this doesn't happen until the final weapon is unveiled. So even though that Split Mushroom is a maverick, X actually has sympathy for him and tries to fix him, but Double just didn't take too kindly to that and just flat out kills him. Really goes to show that Double really is living up to his name. Slash Beast is kind of interesting because even though we see how ruthless he is, I find it surprising what he says at the very end. But before I get into that, I had to go back to Iris real quick, because Zero's reasoning for being on the military train kind of makes this the more motivative portion of this story here. So at this point in the story, Iris is still in a comatose state because of the infection after Cyber Peacock's self-destruction. So Zero needs to find a vaccine that Slash Beast has in his possession. And when Zero destroys one of the trains, one of the Repliforce subordinates tells Slash Beast this, and he gets instantly mad and just tears him apart. This is like if General Grievous was so angry that he took out one of his lightsabers and then he just diced up all the droids when one of them reports that either a Jedi escaped or one of their flagships got destroyed. That's what I'm getting from this. So as Zero continues to find the vaccine, X shows up wearing the ultimate armor, and Slash Beast says that X is nothing more than prey. But as X is about to destroy him with a charge shot, Slash Beast actually begs for his life. And X finds that ironic, seeing that Slash Beast is nothing more than a murderer. So, of course, X puts him out of his misery. But displaying the brutality and how much of a potential megalomaniac Slash Beast is, honestly, I kind of like him a bit more after this, because we see how ruthless he are when he says, "You are nothing more than prey to me," in the game. But this really solidifies the fact that I think he may be the angriest of the bunch, and he does live up to what he is, a beast. That Slash is. So I stand corrected. Turns out that Frost Walrus pretty much has the darkest story out of everybody, because aside from the fact that he really loves destroying things, his side of the story in the manga gets amped up by tenfold. So when Maverick Hunters show up to basically hunt him down, not only does Frost Walrus just freeze them on contact, but he also just lets them hang like they're statues. And then he just keeps freezing them one by one and then just collects them. And the ones that he kept on ice, he thaws them out, forces them to run, and then he treats that like it's some sick death game. One of which is, if they survive for more than 20 seconds, they would just be frozen while the other ones are smashed to bits. And then when General basically told him to just cut that out, that's when Frost Walrus starts this other weird death game where he's forcing these captured Maverick Hunters to run, and then he just kills them for sport. And this was later impeded when X and Blizzard Buffalo, of all Mavericks, or a Maverick that is now a reformed Maverick Hunter, shows up, but Frost Walrus beats them both. And just when X was about to finish off Frost Walrus here, he just stands there, and then X gets impaled by one of his icicles on his shoulder. So he loses consciousness, and then Blizzard Buffalo steps up to defend him. And when X wakes up, he notices that Blizzard Buffalo is just dead on the floor, impaled by a large icicle. So that part in the beginning where Blizzard Buffalo was just frozen, chances are that after his destruction, Frost Walrus just takes him like he's some sort of prize. So X puts up another fight, goes to the snow base with the right armor, and though X does manage to weaken Frost Walrus with the right armor's fuel tank, that's not enough to stop Frost Walrus. He's basically a tyrant in this, which is kind of odd, because despite the fact that he walks so slowly, lack of speed should be the advantage here, but Frost Walrus is doing a good of enough job where speed is even a factor. He's just a powerhouse. So before X gets himself killed, General shows up and then just kills him himself and then save X's life. This to me is by far the darkest one of all, because aside of the fact that Frost Walrus is living up to his true nature of him destroying things, the fact that he's capturing Maverick Hunters and then forcing them to do these sick death games, that's kind of sadistic. Like, you would ever think that Frost Walrus would act like this? Like, it's one thing to destroy things, but actually playing with lives like that? I don't know what else to say here other than that this is probably the sickest one by far. Good lord. There's a lot of information for Colonel here, so I'll try to highlight what I consider to be the more important topics. So even though we see how ruthless Colonel is, he actually has a little bit of a soft spot, because when he's speaking to Zero about this tree that he likes, he's saying it in such a way that he embraces the nature of humanity, as in he develops some sort of soft spot and he embraces that by spending time underneath this tree, rather in despair or sorrow or even happiness, and he feels that nature and humanity just go hand in hand together. So at one point you get his more subtle side, and then when Zero becomes a Maverick Hunter prior to the events of X1, Zero is resting underneath that tree, and to me that comes off that Zero understands what Colonel was talking about. So over time, Zero and Colonel actually form a bond as they do their duties as Maverick Hunters, which ultimately leads up to the incident that happened in Sky Lagoon. And when Zero finds the Repliforce symbol on one of these Mavericks, specifically Origion, that's when Zero started demanding an explanation from Colonel, and even Colonel just doesn't know what's going on, and still he refuses to disarm. Then there were riots against Repliforce, and Colonel, Storm L, and General are discussing about the topic, which ultimately led for Repliforce to start striving for independence. So then Colonel visits Frost Walrus and basically warns him to not go too crazy with the destruction and just flat out tells him to just refrain from doing so. So during the conflict, Zero and Colonel meet once again underneath the tree, but as they fought, Iris shows up and basically says that if they continue this fight, she will commit suicide, which is crazy. I would never imagine Iris going that far to taking her own life just to prevent these two from fighting and basically just destroying this tree. Like, it's that important. So Colonel selflessly thanks Zero for rescuing Iris, and when news breaks out that Iris has been infected because of what Cyber Peacock did, Colonel basically breaks protocol and sees that Iris is in this stasis pod. And even though Zero went out of his way to rescue Iris with the vaccine that he got, Colonel is still holding on to his beliefs and he still engages in combat against Zero. Even though he loses an arm, Colonel refuses to give up and charges at Zero, which prompted Zero to just slice him in half. But as he does that, Colonel is actually smiling, and he smiles out of respect for Zero at the very end. So this explores his more compassionate side, because we hardly ever see that. Because there were scientists that tried to make something similar to X, but they never fully understood it. So they had to split that concept into two Reploids. One was Iris and one was her brother Colonel. The more compassionate side would go to Iris, but the harsh nature of that would go to Colonel, and you don't really see any compassion from the Colonel. For him, he always upholds his duty as Colonel of the Repliforce, but here we actually explore more of his subtle nature, but he's still full of pride nonetheless. So it doesn't matter if Iris is in safe hands or not. To him, he still had a duty to uphold, even if it means striking down a fellow friend like Zero here. And at the very end, when he smiles, it's out of compassion for Zero, not just because he rescued Iris, but for just being a friend, a rival. Zero was just a good friend for Colonel. So I don't know if I would call this a bitter end. I mean, honestly it is, because it's literally Zero just hacking him in half. But the fact that he would smile at the very end really goes to show that tough guys do indeed have soft spots, and Colonel is definitely no exception. Turns out that Double is a double agent. Who'd have thought? So the reason why Erogion has the Repliforce symbol is because Double planted it there so he could frame Repliforce for the destruction of Sky Lagoon, as well as finding other quote-unquote evidence that Zero was upset about, but then he apologized afterward. He was also the witness of the general killing Frost Walrus, and he was also the one who shredded Split Mushroom into pieces, like I said before. And the rest of it kind of plays out like the game, but this is where it gets a tad dark. Double was ordered to use Origion to attack the city, all according to a plan that is known as the Assassination Game. And he was quite pleased to see Repliforce and the Maverick Hunters kill each other, and X did not take too kindly to this at all. He even sheds a tear, and then he is immediately enraged, using the Ultimate Armor's Nova Strike to charge at Double and to basically knock him down. And the strange thing about this is that he has an orb in his chest that he uses to regenerate. So obviously X just blasts at the smithereens. Everyone knows Double at this point from Mega Man X4, but this just makes him a bit more maniacal than how he's portrayed. Also, the fact that he looks all innocent and like a fanboy towards X, but underneath it all, he's just a cold-blooded killer, way worse than Slash Beast. Like, character-wise, Double makes Slash Beast look like a cat, and it almost feels like that he's practically enjoying killing Reploids. Like, he lives to just tear things apart, and he does all that with a smile. Kind of crazy how this weird overnutrient looking Reploid looks like a klutz and looks too kind for his own good, but underneath it all, he was just a devil in disguise. But I just gotta think about that. I didn't even come up with a design, let alone concept art, just to make something like that. If I see someone suffering in front of me, regardless of whether they are an enemy or friend, I will wholeheartedly help. This quote from Iris sums her up perfectly given her role in this whole conflict. She is a nurse and she doesn't like war, she doesn't like it when anyone gets hurt, and she will help anyone who has been injured, fatally or otherwise. And even though she was caught in a crossfire a few times during this whole thing, not once did she waver, nor did she resort to any violent methods. Whether she was inflicted with the virus or she resorted to any force when she saw Zero and the Colonel fight near the tree. Even though she reminded Colonel of what the tree meant, it took her to potentially killing herself just so both Zero and the Colonel can drop their weapons. And when she sensed that the Colonel died in battle, she breaks out of the pod, crawls to her brother's side, merged with him to create that right armor that you saw in the game. Except here, Zero tries to rescue her, and when he pulls her out, Iris basically says her goodbyes and expresses her enjoyment of the time that she spent with him. And the rest, you already know.
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
And I really do like how Iris was added in Mega Man X Gen 2 because the developers actually felt sorry for what became of her in X4. So that to me is paying respect and homage to this character. And honestly, I feel like that Iris is one of the more iconic female characters in not just Mega Man X, but also Mega Man in general. Because even though you get characters like Roll or Ilia, or Roll Casket from Mega Man Legends, I would honestly put Iris in that list of most iconic Mega Man characters. The way she thinks, her motivation, and how she was able to aid both sides as a nurse. Because of this, I have a more newfound respect for Iris, despite how traumatized she was when she sees her brother, the one person that she could relate to deeply the most. And I kind of feel bad for her too, because I'm pretty sure she didn't want this whole thing to happen. And if she were to see the brighter picture and got to the core of the situation, maybe she would have succumbed to some lament or maybe guilt, but at least she would still be there, being at Zero's side. And unfortunately, the tragedy was too big to bear. So yes, I honestly do feel bad for Iris. She honestly deserved better. Knock another one up for the Night Sky Act, because for General, it's mostly what occurs in the game, how he declares independence, but here in the manga, he talks about it with Storm Island and the Colonel, and that's how they ended up broadcasting the independence, and how General believes that he won't get a second chance at being legitimate, for lack of a better term, in the eyes of the humans. So after he kills Frost Walrus for his destructive behavior, X is really upset about that, and then he takes it out on General, and the General just stands there as a way for him to apologize for Frost Walrus's actions, and X just shoots wildly, and then he just leaves. So later on in the final weapon, or what the manga calls it, the Death Flower, X shows up and fights against General, but he doesn't kill him, he just knocks him out unconscious. And then X proceeds to kill Double. And after he does that, the General just grabs X and hugs him softly, and then is reduced to tears in grief. And then he goes on to sacrifice himself to prevent the cannon from firing at the Earth, all while making his salute in the process. Call me crazy if you want to, but I honestly get the feeling that General is more of a father figure here than he comes off in the game, because you can tell that he cares deeply about his men and that he will be sympathetic if need be. Even so much as hugging X, and then X is just having a moment. And if there's one thing that I do like about this manga is the fact that they're characterizing these characters in such a way that it feels more deeper than what the game could possibly do. Whether it's showing sympathy or crudeness, or even so much that it feels character breaking, whether it be X shooting down Mavericks out of anger, or Iris taking drastic measures to stop Zero and the Colonel from fighting. So far, I am intrigued and just appalled as to how deep the characterization is here. It's actually magnificent and inspiring at the same time, seeing the general act so sympathetically right up until the end. The one responsible for the Great Wilberforce War, the one that hired Double to plant that fake evidence so that way Wilberforce would be the one who would be labeled as Mavericks. The one who schemed this entire plot from top to bottom was none other than Sigma. This guy has been planning this since his inception, and he is first seen sitting in a dark cloak in a creepy throne scheming this entire time. Sigma literally has been scheming so hard.
Yes! I'm scheming so hard right now!
And even though he doesn't have much major roles in this, he's the one that essentially kicked everything off. In fact, we don't even see him interact with the general like he does in the game. So I would go so far to say that he has a minor role in this than he does in the game. Because in the game, he's the one that hires Double to spy on X. He also entices Mamba Dragoon to blow up the reactor in Sky Lagoon just so he could have a chance to fight against X and Zero. And he's also the one that hired Double to kill those Maverick Hunters before he goes after X.
Commander X, please respond.
What happened? Report.
Nothing to worry about.
No further transmissions unless necessary to carry out the operation.
Understood.
I'm breaking contact.
And now, X will be my next target.
So even though that he plays a little role in this story, he's pretty much the same Sigma that everyone knows. Except this time, he's sitting on the sidelines, and then we see what happens potentially before he has that meeting with General. So what I just went through, I would consider the highlights of the Mega Man X4 manga. I initially just wanted to go through the main antagonists as well as some other characters like Iris and Double, while sprinkling in a little bit of X and Zero's perspective and impact of the story. But overall, I do find this to be more fleshed out, more characterized, and honestly more impactful. And it kind of adds a bit more to the motivations and the viewpoints that the characters have, however big or small they may possibly be. And honestly, it kind of surprises me in ways that characters can actually behave the way that they did in the manga, and how their interpretation is much deeper than it is when compared to the game. So I'm glad that I actually took the time to, at the very least, skim through some of these pages and share them all. And also, it was enlightening to see a more deeper and broader perspective on certain scenarios that may have been brief in the game. Whether it was how Jet Stingray blew up the city, or Blizzard Buffalo showing up, or even how Slash Beast is possibly the most ruthless member of Repliforce. So I consider the dialogue in the game between the Repliforce members and the Mavericks a taste of what they do in the manga, which is absolutely crazy to me. Just how dark and almost senile, like Iris threatening to kill herself just so the tree would be preserved and that Zero and the Colonel wouldn't fight anymore. That's how deep this goes. The fact that a character is actually considering that. In fact, out of all the characters in this that I went through, I think Web Spider, Slash Beast, Frost Walrus, Iris, and Colonel, and even General may be the highlights out of reading this whole thing. or searching through what I would consider the highlights. So if you or someone you know read through this entire manga, I'm curious how you felt about this entire thing, reading it from beginning to end if you did. And if this is your first exposure to seeing this, I gotta ask, which one impacted you the most? Because after going through some of these, I would never think that X4 could go even darker than it already did in the game when it was released. So X4 to this day, I still consider it probably the most dire of the X games, and also just how bittersweet it is that actually made me wonder what could happen to X and Zero. X was worried that he was going to become a maverick. Zero pretty much embraced the idea of being put down or sealed away, one of those. So I think it just further adds to what X4 on PlayStation already presented, and it just adds way more depth and characterization than I thought possible. So X4 may be strong on PlayStation and perhaps even Sega Saturn, but it is way stronger in the manga. It's unbelievable. So curious if anyone read this thing or if this is your first time exposing to this. I just wanted to take the time and point out what I consider the most interesting or intriguing, or maybe some trivia, who knows. But I kind of like searching through other pieces of media like this and see if there are any differences, or if it adds to the overall story, or if it could potentially clean something up that the original source didn't. But with this, I feel like it just adds so much more. So with that, I am glad that I took the time to read this whole thing, and I'm also glad for anyone that saw this until the very end. And to that, I say thank you, and please look forward to the rest of the X series.